My friends are tired of this story, so I'm going to inflict it on you. I've house sit for hundreds of families, and only once was the place haunted. I was pet sitting in a fancy part of town. Many of the homes aren't visible from the street. The lots are set back on acres and acres. One of the houses I sat for even had a private lake. This time, I was staying in a giant wooden lodge on a winding, precarious gravel road. One swerve, then you fall into a river 100 feet below. It was wild. It was dark, quiet, with tons of animals. This was a few days before Halloween. I hear a racket coming from upstairs around 11 p.m. Squirrels, maybe. The next night, the racket is back at 11 p.m. sharp. The Rottweiler gets upset, whining and running in circles. Finally pissing in the corner. She's known as the Iron Bladder, so this was unthinkable to me. We had been out only 3 hours previously. The racket is getting louder. Sounds like someone is walking around upstairs, banging into things. At this point, I'm scared. I call my witchy friend, and she suggests I do a circle of protection. The racket lies down. We go out to the kitchen, and I see a thing in the rafters, only visible for a second or two. It looks like an invisible person wearing a white sheet, twirled briefly left and right and then disappeared. I do a protection circle. Dog sits a respectable distance away while I turn in circles with a knife pointing outwards. Dog runs up to me when I finish and put the knife down. She's licking me happily. I'm glad the owner doesn't have indoor cameras. I tell the owner that he has squirrels in the attic. He says he doesn't have an attic. I go up the stairs and see that it's an old bedroom. My boyfriend tries to tell me that it was in my head. I try to forget this happened, but I'm a jumpy mess every time I house sit. I started declining gigs. 6 months passed. It's time for our next gig in the haunted house, and I meet the owner for a walk. He starts telling me about his young son, who died roughly a year ago, on the property. That he believes in spirits, and he saw a buck with a big rack pause and stare at him in the driveway. I believe that was my son. I smile and nod, unwilling to tell him I'm pretty sure I saw his son too. I did it for him again. I go for a swim in his pool, but feel something is off. I put my hands down on the side of the pool to pull myself out, and there are large handprints to either side of my hands. I pull myself out quickly. I try to forget about what happened, but I never sat for them again. My boyfriend tries to convince me nothing actually happened. Squirrels or branches on the roof, or dogs can have accidents. Or your headlamp created a reflection on the ceiling. You already put your hands down on the poolside. I probably hurt my credibility by calling him to cry one night that a ghost moved my cake. Check in the fridge, he suggested. Why would it be in the fridge? Oh. I know it sounds crazy, but please hear me out. I know people say it's hallucinations because you missed your loved ones, but this is not that. It started when I was 4 and my auntie Pat died from lupus. Before my mom told my brother and I the news, I saw my auntie. She came into my room while I was watching TV and sat on my bed and rubbed my hair. She had just done my braids, and it wasn't uncommon for her to come around any time, so I assumed she was visiting. She walked out of the door, and I found it weird that she hadn't spoken. But I was 4, so I left it alone. I only remember this vividly because the next morning, my mom told us that she had died the previous afternoon. After I asked her why she visited last night, she looked shocked and told me I was dreaming. This has happened to me with every loved one since. I've lost several aunties and uncles, my 2-year-old cousin, my grandpa, my great-grandpa, my best friend, and several close friends since then. Every time, they come to me and sit quietly before leaving. The next day, or even a few hours later, I always get news that they've passed. The most recent was my baby's father, who I had last seen in January. I live in an apartment now, and when I saw him standing at my room door on May 22nd, I knew he was dead. He sat with me, holding my hand and kissing my forehead, and when he left, I broke down, knowing once again someone I loved would be leaving me. I got the call a few hours later, around 5 in the morning. He had passed at 12 a.m. when I saw him at 2 a.m. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I remember going to sleep over at a kid's house. I'll call him Richard. I thought this was so long ago I may be forgetting what his real name is. Their parents were friends with my parents, so we weren't close friends, but I was very happy about it. He had what may have been the coolest thing for a kid in the 80s to ever see. A Pac-Man arcade cabinet in his basement. Now, to help you understand this story, you need to understand the layout of the house. This was a raised ranch. You walked in the front door, looking at a small set of stairs that led down to a finished basement area, and a similar set of stairs right next to it, going up to the main floor. You could see the kitchen from the landing up the stairs as you entered the house, and to the right was the living room. The left side of the main floor was a hallway to the 3 bedrooms and the bathroom. One was Richard's, where I would be sleeping with another of his friends. I'll call him Michael. But the basement was what I focused on. Because as you went down to the basement family room, there was a hallway that had a small room to the left where the arcade cabinet was. It was a small room covered with brown wood panelling, like all basements in the 80s had. The front door of the coin receptacle was left open, so you didn't need quarters. You would just flick the little metal pin to mimic a quarter and play. This is where I wanted to go. But it was time for bed. Now, going into Richard's room, it was covered in WWE wrestling posters and toys. I was not as into them as the two of them were, but played with them like kids do. We ended up staying up very late, much too late, because the parents just let us do whatever, and it was great. This was also my first real sleepover, where we had run of the house. Considering we were 3 boys not being watched, we were not doing anything dangerous. Play wrestling, watch TV in his room, and go to the kitchen for junk. However, we were not playing Pac-Man. Yet, I thought. At some point, I'm sitting in Richard's room by myself. The two of them left for some reason. I felt a little uncomfortable, for whatever silly reason. They were gone for a long time. Self-conscious over the fact I was not close friends with either of them, I asked myself, what were they doing without me? Let me check. I leave the room, walking towards the basement, thinking that must be it. Even if they were not there, I would get to play, so win-win. I walked down the stairs to the basement, where it was dark, but bright enough to see. It may have been a full moon, or there were outside lights, because I didn't need to turn on any lights. I saw the room and saw the hallway, where the arcade awaits, but then Richard walked out and stood in front of me. He didn't say anything, and he was in his underwear. This was very uncomfortable, because he looked mad, like he didn't want me to go down there. I stood on the bottom step, not moving for a while. None of us said anything. Finally, I figured, okay, you do not want me down here, and went back upstairs to go to bed. Looking up the second stairs towards the kitchen is where the chill crawled up my spine. Richard and Michael were in the kitchen getting something to eat, and were up the entire time. Now, Richard was an only child, and there was no one else in the house other than his mother and father. Their rooms were across the hall from his. There was no other way from the basement to the kitchen, other than maybe from outside. They couldn't have walked past me without me knowing, and there wasn't enough time to put clothes back on and get back into the kitchen if they were just pranking me. They also didn't say anything about what I saw, because I said nothing. Thinking if they were pranking me, they would have mentioned it. I went into the kitchen and ate some food, and went right to bed. If this was a joke, a 7-8-year-old boy would have said something. Didn't say a word to anyone about the kid in the basement. To this day, I have no explanation for this. I've been staying at my best friend's house for the past month or so, babysitting her kid, my godson. The house is only a short 2-story complex. My godson is only 1.5 years, but he's been showing me some mysterious behaviour lately. We live in the beautiful state of New Hampshire, but sometimes it's not as boring as it seems. New Hampshire is known for its historical background and beautiful scenery, but sometimes it's more than just the history and the scenery that can bring a man here. I was sitting on a couch as usual, minding my business, and it was about midnight. She has LEDs, and she always has the colour purple on. On the right by the living room is a simple but small kitchen, and I believe that's the source of the strange things that have been happening. I was never able to capture any other evidence besides a boyfriend, as well as herself listening and hearing the noises sometimes. Just last night, we thought the baby was awake because we heard knocking from his room, so I went to his room to check on him. I walked up a creaky-ass stairs in hopes to get the baby's attention that someone was coming to his rescue. I opened his door, only to find him still asleep, and the mystery knocking had stopped as soon as I had gotten up there. Sometimes things happen in the kitchen while I'm asleep on the couch, and me being a 20-year-old female with a baby face, along with a short and stubby frame, I disappeared under my covers and just talked to my fiancé on the phone and told him everything that happened. He thinks it's getting to me because we've been watching Sam and Colby videos almost every night, but I know what's going on. I feel the presence behind me even now as I type this. My best friend, her boyfriend, and I went shopping for a Ouija board, and we're not sure if we're being ballsy or if they're moving the planchette. I'm just going to cut to the chase and tell you what's been happening after a short introduction. I've been staying over at my best friend Lexi's house for the past month or so, babysitting her son while she goes to work. The baby and I have both been hearing things, but it's mainly been the adults in the house who were afraid of what could possibly be lurking in the darkness of a kitchen and stairwell at the late hours of the night, as well as the wee hours of the morning. I've started noticing things even before I knew what they were, since I was a little girl. I've moved a bit during my childhood, and almost everywhere I went, something followed. It all started as just sounds and knocks to seeing things in the corner of my eye to shadows. Nothing ever moves or flips over, but there's usually presence here and there. Sometimes I wonder what it could be. Sometimes I mind my own business, or ignore it altogether. At the different locations I moved to, it was more of just knocks, bangs and whispers. I never thought it could get any worse, but I'm glad to say that it's only been that way since then. I started seeing it the longer I was here. I'm almost certain it was getting closer since I'm always sleeping with my head towards the front door instead of by the doorway of the kitchen and living room. I never got a glimpse of what I thought was the face of the figure I saw. It was dark, really dark, as if lights never touched it before. I didn't think it was possible because I've never seen anything that dark before. One night, I was playing video games with my online friends and fiancé. Before I had told them I was going to go get ready for bed, something behind me fell. I thought it was something from the couch that I left on the corner of the cushion, like my phone, just in case I needed it. But it wasn't. There was nothing behind me, next to me, above me, or in front of me besides the floor, roof, and TV. I let my friends know and they thought I was just being paranoid, but told them about how her house can be a bit weird, especially in the kitchen. The knocks and bangs from upstairs in the whole house, while the rest of the complex is asleep. No one else was awake, and it was about midnight. I tried to sleep it off and not to think about it, but as I have insomnia, I wake up almost every 3 hours. It may have been me being groggy, as I woke up, or my eyes playing tricks on me, but I saw something move in the darkness of the kitchen. I really did. It was just a dark, slender figure, and I don't know if it was facing me or not, but it was just there. It was unmoving, not speaking, and not floating around or even standing on the floor. But it wasn't there for long. It left, not turned on its heel and left, but just simply disappeared, just gone. I never saw anything until that night, but I was pretty tired, so I pulled a blanket over my head and went back to sleep. I awoke another 3 hours later to the sound of Lexi's boyfriend getting ready for work. I knew Lexi would be up in another hour, seeing as how she'd be getting ready for work as well. So I just woke up, took my vitamins, and got dressed for another day of babysitting. I never had a problem with kids. It was just the way I was. But when the baby started crying and pointing at the corner I was next to, I started freaking out and finished up the dishes as well as cleaning off the wet counter and the sweeping. I blocked off the doorway to the kitchen with one of the baby gates and sat on the couch watching a show and gave him the bottle he had milk in, and he was more calm and collected now that he was occupied with me. The last thing I felt before turning around and leaving the kitchen was something tugging on my shirt, and I shrugged it off as my shirt got caught on a hook on the wall. I only go in the kitchen if I really have to wash dishes or get us something to eat. If anyone has any questions or advice, I'd deeply appreciate it. We smudged the house already, so that's that. It may not sound genuine, but I can promise you, that's all I can remember and put together. This happened last summer, late July, and it was me, my sister, and our cousins on their farm. We were sitting in their UTV with one of my cousins driving alongside the cornfield. We weren't going all that fast, so the noise coming from the vehicle wasn't that loud. That's when we heard what sounded like either my uncle or my dad's voice coming from the direction of the field. But at that point in the year, the corn was above our heads, so we couldn't see anything. I told my cousin to stop driving for a second and asked if anyone heard that. They all nodded their heads and said what they heard, and we all heard the same sentence. I forgot what it is now, because it's been so long, but it was something along the lines of, "Come back," or "Where are you going?" Which was strange, because once we were already far enough along the trail that no one would be near, the closest neighbour was on the completely opposite side we were. And what really made us scared was that both of our dads had left a few minutes ago, so there was no chance that they would have been out there. Anyways, because we were all so shaken up, from that we turned back and went inside to ask if it was possible our dads had come back already, or if they had left later than we thought. And they were definitely not on the property during whatever happened. This confirmed it for us, and my cousin went and got his gun and some other weapons for us to go back and investigate. We spent probably 30 minutes back there trying to find a source for what happened, but we didn't find anything. I've heard other stories of people hearing voices of people they know, or even themselves coming from another room, when no one's actually there. I've searched everywhere for this and can't find an answer, so this is my best option for now. Somewhere between 2 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. on the 25th of July, my boyfriend and I were driving down Main Street in our city on our way home from my parents' house, and I saw a bright star in the sky. I pointed it out to my boyfriend and was like, "Wow, look at that really bright star, babe, it's moving." The star shot from the right side of the sky to the left side pretty fast. It was almost like a shooting star, but it was extra bright and moved smoothly and far without the light dimming or going away. Then it stopped in one spot and started to elongate. I literally watched it look like it was growing and getting bigger. It then turned into a fucking crescent moon. My mind was literally blown and still is. There was nothing tall on the ground to obstruct my view of the star or moon, so the fact that it was moving like that and changing shape right before my eyes made me feel like I was in the Twilight Zone. All of this happened over a span of about 15 to 20 minutes. I've been looking it up here and there and haven't found anything that describes what I saw. Maybe someone here knows. If it's just something I don't know about, I'll feel really stupid, but I'd rather at least have some answers. Anyone know what it is? I keep seeing things that keep disappearing before me. Let me start with a little background. I grew up in a house that was well over 200 years of history, one way or another. The property originally used to be a complex with few buildings. But we will focus on the house where my family stayed 2 rooms, barely big enough for a single 6-foot person to lay down. A small shack toilet next to the rooms and a well in the yard. The place was situated right next to a graveyard, and in one of the original rooms, there's a window facing the graveyard, and you could see the graves 2 feet away from you if you opened the window. It was so close. Nobody knows what the buildings used to be originally, nor when the original buildings were built. But with a bit of digging in local history and land records, I was able to dig up that it was originally used to be part of a royal estate, and changed hands since then 2 times, before my family moved in a little less than a century ago. There is conflicting information about it being a taxation office around the 1700s and later being purchased by a trader that don't have any information about the trader. I was unable to find anything. But the property has definitely changed hands to a different person since then, from whom finally my grandparents had bought the property from. Around that time, my country gained independence, and my grandpa was sort of involved in this independence movement as well. And the place had also become a spot where many of those resistance meetings were held in the different buildings in the complex. Around that time, 2 people committed suicide in one of the rooms of one of the buildings. Moving on, since I don't know much about what happened after that. But after the independence, most of other parts of the building were converted to a small hotel and modified and put on rent as shops. And some presence from the independence movement occupied some parts of other buildings in the complex. Anyways, around the 1960s, the area changed a lot. The graveyard was eventually moved and the area was redeveloped. My grandpa also expanded the house where they stayed, but with the original structures incorporated in it, building more rooms and better toilets, etc. He also purchased some adjacent plots at the time and built a wall around much of the perimeter. A few years later, one day, they'll find a dead body floating in the well. Someone jumped the perimeter wall and committed suicide in the well. The body was taken out and the well was cleaned and they continued drinking water from it. Later in the 70s, there was a bit of a communist uprising in the country, and a lot of violence took place. A person was stabbed to death inside our house, and bombing by communists of our house. 1 or 2 more were killed around the complex, as well in other buildings. After a decade or so, the political climate had settled down, and my grandparents once more decided to expand the house, and this time build an entire new house right next to the old one in the plots, which was part of the graveyard previously. This is the little background of the house, much of which I didn't know until 3 years ago. Now my story begins. Since I was 3 years old, I apparently used to see a lady around the house and talk to her. But when someone would ask who I'm talking to, I would point and tell them, but nobody was there. Well, it's not just me with whom such an incident has taken place. My grandma used to see a lady in another building, and my parents have had similar experiences of seeing people around the house as well. And some guests who didn't know anything about the house. But I'll stick to what happened to me. This incident when I was around 5 or 6 years old. One day at night, the power went out, and when the power returned, I saw the shadow of a humanoid creature with a fox-like tail going up the stairs. I saw it vividly. I can remember it still now, and I got fever immediately and was sick for a few days after that. Nothing much happened to me after that, and nor that I can remember, but I think it was the beginning of my horror. When I was around 12 or 13, I had this friend. One day, when she came over to my house, she saw something and she got so scared and immediately went home. She never talked to me and never saw her again. The vibes of someone staring at us or going up and down the stairs that everyone felt in the house, other than that. Nothing much happened to me after that till 2016, when I was around 15 or 16, when I started having dreams of talking to this girl who had glasses on. Very vivid dream. I still remember her very clearly. Both of us were talking on the roof of our house, and she would tell me about herself. These dreams continued, and multiple dreams every night. Around the same time, my school crush used to come over to my house, and we did, And one day after she left my house, it was pretty late. She went to her home. She lived close by, and that night she woke up in the middle of the night and heard a voice calling for her around from a tree in a yard. And when she took a look outside of her window, she seemed to see someone hanging on the tree. She was super frightened, and they moved away to another city soon after, which was already in plans. Meanwhile, my dreams continued of the same girl, where we would confine so much of our stuff to each other. And then, come one evening, around that time, I saw this girl. The girl from my dreams. The girl from the dreams I've been seeing for months. Same dreams. She was standing outside my room. She called my name and turned around and left. I was in bed. I ran after her because it was impossible. Because the first I knew, the front door was locked and nobody was there except me and my mum in the house. Nobody had seen her leave. From that day on, I stopped having her dreams, but new problems started to arise soon after that winter. I saw that shadow creature with the foxtail again. This time, it was followed by a death in the house soon after. After that, it felt super uneasy for everyone to stay in the house. But after a few weeks, things had settled down a bit. Till I started having super strange dreams. But since 2016, I would most days have these strange dreams or nightmares, mostly related to ghosts, that continue to this day. And people still continue to see things around the house. I'm from India, and I had to move away from my hometown for studies. I was renting a house with 7 of my friends. The house had 2 floors. Ground floor was locked, and we didn't have access to it, and the second floor had 2 bedrooms and 1 room that had no window, kind of a storage room. This house was attached with other houses. One of the walls was shared with the other house, and the terrace was also attached. So during the night, we always heard footsteps, but we disregarded it as like someone from the next house was walking upstairs. This happened daily, and we mostly didn't care about it. Back of our head, we knew that something wasn't right. We had small stray puppies come to our room. We used to play and feed them, so it was friendly to us. Me and my friend always go out around 10:30 p.m. to get some tea or snacks. But one night I had an assignment to finish, so I told my buddies to go without me. It should have been 15 minutes after they left, and I heard the footsteps, but I didn't bother to acknowledge it. Then, one of the pups came upstairs, and I put some food for it in the bowl, next to my bed for him. Usually, the pup would come in without hesitation, but this time the pup just sat down outside of the door. I tried calling it, but the pup wouldn't step in, and then started crying. I got goosebumps, and my mind just kicked into survival mode, and I just ran out from the house. I didn't look back, or try to lock or turn off the lights. I ran till I found my friends. I told my buddies what happened, and they just laughed it off. The other incident was my friend having an episode of sleep paralysis. He told me an old, scary-looking lady was sitting on his chest, and he couldn't move or talk. One of my other friends saw him struggling, and he kind of woke him up. Last night, me and my friend decided we wanted to go into the woods to get a little scared. So we brought flashlights and a knife and went down to a creek in our woods. To get the best experience, we turned the flashlights off and stood there. Both of us had an overwhelming feeling that we were being watched, so we got out of the woods. Later that night, we were hanging out on a small street near our house, and we wanted to get scared again, so we went to a dark corner of the road where there was just suspicious houses in the woods. We both felt the same feeling from earlier, that we were being watched, so we looked down into the woods about 50 yards away and noticed a certain part of the woods was pitch black, where you could make out the rest of the woods. The feeling started to get more ominous, and we started to feel surrounded and heard walking in the woods and leaves being crunched and twigs breaking. The silence was too loud, and without even speaking to each other, we both had an overwhelming feeling of dread, and we both sprinted back up the street. But while I was sprinting, I turned to look back, and for a split second, I saw a girl in a white gown in the dark spot I had mentioned earlier. She didn't have a body, and the only thing I could make out as a body was what looked like a grey aura outlining where the body should be. We ran back to my house and couldn't even describe what we were feeling, but I know I'm staying out of the woods for a while. This experience took place in the spring of '77, when I was 5 years old. My mother had a friend named Vicky, who had invited us to spend the weekend at her house. Vicky's house was not some run-down, obviously haunted home that you would expect for a story like this. It was actually a newer 2-story build that was less than 10 years old. While the house did not give off any weird vibes, I remember that Vicky wasn't exactly the nicest woman, and always seemed to be giving my sister and I trouble, like she was thinking we were going to damage something by being kids. In Vicky's basement, she had one of those hanging half-basket wicker chairs that were popular in the '70s. I was down in the basement sitting on the wicker chair, being very careful, as I didn't want to give Vicky another reason to tell me off, when suddenly the chain or rope that fastened the chair to the ceiling broke, and it fell forward on the open side, trapping me inside of it like a cage. At the same time that I fell to the floor, Vicky's stereo suddenly turned on by itself and started playing very loud music. I was utterly terrified and screamed for my mother. My mother and Vicky came rushing downstairs, and my mom got me out from under the chair, while Vicky shut the stereo off. Vicky then started laying into me for breaking the chair and playing with the stereo, but my mom told her to shut it. We left shortly afterwards, and I had calmed down. To this day, I can vividly remember the feeling of terror as that chair fell on top of me and the stereo came on loudly. When I brought it up to my mom years later, she remembered the incident and took us home because she didn't think it was possible for me to turn on the stereo and manage to break the chair in the time it took between the stereo coming on and me screaming for her. She thought Vicky was acting like a bitch the entire time, and yelling at me for the incident was the last straw. We never went back to Vicky's again, and I can't say I'm at all heartbroken about it. Something in that house didn't like me, and it wasn't just Vicky. I've been living in a flat with my family since my childhood. In the room which I shared with my sister, we have 2 beds, a single queen-size bed and a normal double bed. Before I get my own room, I shared the double bed with my older sister. I've had a few experiences, seeing things like a black figure sleeking across, hearing human-like talking noises from under the bed. But I was a child then, and I definitely cannot rely on those memories. But I was super scared and imaginative about those things. Fast forward to now, my middle sister uses the room by herself. The 2 beds still remain, and she uses the queen-size bed. I recently moved into the house after being away for close to a year, and I was using the room while she was away on a trip, because her room is bigger. I slept on the double bed and was using the room by myself. Only me and my parents were in the home, and their room was to the other end of the flat. Whenever I slept in that room, I felt a very strange sensation, like I wasn't alone. I've lived in several houses over the past years, and none of them have me feeling like this. This is my home where I've lived most of my life, and yet I felt uneasy in this room alone. One of the nights, I also felt like something sat or slept next to me while I was on the bed. This was pretty scary, but I don't tend to believe in these things, so I shrugged it off as my own sense of fear creating illusions. I slept in that room for a week. Throughout this week, I woke up several times in the night, switching on the light to make sure I really was alone. I used to shut the balcony door and windows to calm myself down, because I thought it was possibly the sounds from outside that made me feel like that. The dreams I got on that bed were horrible. I dreamt of the worst things possible, and even dreamt things like me getting pulled into the wall next to the bed and getting stuck in the concrete wall alive. I dreamt of the death of people I knew. I died in my dreams. It wasn't the greatest, but I tend to dream a lot, so it didn't bother me too much. I moved back into my room one night and didn't think about it much. I got a sound sleep in my own room. Now, a week ago, my sister came to me and told me about something that she experienced recently. She was sitting on the bigger bed, talking to her fiancé on a call, and had a blanket over her. She felt like something tugged the blanket. She pulled it back over her and secured it properly. Apparently, it happened 4 more times, and she even mentioned to her fiancé that something is in the room and tugging the blanket off her. She simply prayed and went back on her bed, and nothing happened after that. Now, I don't know what's up with this bed, but I want to know what to do about it. If there is an entity, should I go shout at it to try to get it out of my home, or should I try something else? I'm not scared of it per se, but I don't want to needlessly encounter any violent activity. I stay in a house which has 3 bedrooms, out of which I rent 1. My bedroom is the one on the first floor, right below the attic. Now, I don't know why, but every night after 1 a.m, I hear these tapping sounds in my room. They usually start in this one corner where my drawers are, and eventually I hear these taps on my desk and sometimes my cupboard. The taps are pretty quick and almost rhythmic in a sense that it's about 1.5 taps per second. It's a relatively square room, so I can see almost everything from any part of the room. I usually hear these taps when I'm on my bed, most of the time when I'm awake, and sometimes even when I'm asleep, and it wakes me up. But the strange thing is, as soon as I turn towards the tapping noise, it stops for a bit. At least the rhythmic taps. It's still happening right now, and I believe it will continue till about 4 a.m, after which I never hear any. As soon as I try to figure out the source of the sound, it stops. And after that point, it's just random creaks or taps around my room. I also hear some taps and sounds from the attic, on top, which none of us have really gone up to because you need a ladder, and we haven't got one. Plus, it's going to be really dusty and crude, so no point. Does anyone have any idea what this can be? Or have you experienced anything like this before? I don't really believe in ghosts, but it's just so random that it only happens between these times. I can't really say I believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but I had this experience a while back that I just can't understand. Ever since I was little, it would take me a long time to go to sleep. I'm talking like laying in bed for 3 hours before actually falling asleep. This one night a few years ago, I remember getting very annoyed because I could not fall asleep. I had been laying in bed for at least 4 hours already. It was around 1 a.m, and I had to wake up at 6 a.m. for school, so I was really trying to fall asleep. At the time, for some reason, I was terrified to sleep in pure darkness, so I had an antique lamp on during all hours of the night. I was finally drifting to sleep when I heard a loud slam. I slowly opened my eyes, still very drowsy, being seconds away from peacefully sleeping. Clear as day, I watched my bedroom door, which was previously closed, swing open, then slam again. I watched as my door opened and slammed shut faster and faster. There was nothing I could really do besides watch it. My lamp was on and illuminating the door, so I was able to see that no one was grabbing the doorknob or anything. After at least 2 minutes of me watching my door rapidly open and close, I got kind of fed up. I wasn't scared at all, just ended up mumbling, "Can you, stop?" The door slammed one final time, and that was it. It rolled over towards the wall, my back to the door, and fell asleep. In the morning, I checked my wall and saw a hole that the doorknob left when it slammed into it, so it definitely wasn't a dream. Still not sure what that was, but nothing like that has happened since. I was in the living room playing Xbox, sitting on the couch. It was late, like 1 a.m. My parents were at a wedding that weekend. As I'm playing the game, I hear ruffling going on in my room upstairs. I don't care, because I just assume it's my brother, and continue playing. Then all of a sudden, someone is full on charging down the stairs, like fucking sprinting. When they reach the end, they dart straight into the kitchen, and I hear the fridge door open, then slam closed. My cat on my left side and my dog on my right side were sleeping, and they both jumped up when it happened. The running sound scared me too. I yelled, "Why the hell are you running down the stairs like that?" and got no response. My dog went back to bed, but my cat stared at the kitchen doorway and was meowing a lot, which was uncommon, being he's usually very quiet. I wasn't scared at all at the moment, though, because I thought it was my dumbass brother. I walked at a quick pace to the kitchen while saying, "Scared the shit out of me with how loud you were and I saw the kitchen was empty. Felt immediate chills, some alarm bells going off, but I thought, guess he somehow snuck back upstairs quietly. I was feeling a little scared and wanted confirmation on my explanation for relief, so I went upstairs. Halfway up, I got a text from my brother. "I'm sleeping over at Izzy's. I'll be back around the afternoon." No one was home. It was about 8 years ago, and I still cannot find any way to understand what has happened, except thinking of something paranormal. It was a summer night. I was getting back home after some time out with my friends, and I was giving a ride in my car to a friend of mine. It was like 3 a.m. We were hungry, so he invited me to go inside to eat something. We found a pizza, put it in the oven, ate it, spent some time chatting, and then we walked to the door as I was about to leave around 4 a.m. We were standing near the house entrance in a small hall. His back was facing the door, and I was in front of him, standing about 1.5 meters away. Next to me, there was his cat, and we were talking about it. As he was telling me about its behaviour, we didn't expect what was about to happen. Our talk was suddenly interrupted by something passing between us that caught our attention, followed by a dull noise. We freezed and stiffened up. A few moments of silence passed, and I told him, in the most cautious and unbiased way possible, "Tell me what you have seen." He told me he had seen the figure of a person passing between us. His description totally matched what I had seen, so I was sure I didn't hallucinate. It was something dark, like a shadow, but you could see through it. It was tall, or higher than us anyway, as I remember that when it passed, it was higher than my friend's head. I accurately remembered I could see the profile of a person, maybe that of a woman. The forehead, the nose, the lips, the chin, the neck, and then the chest, that faded into having no colour anymore. In fact, we didn't see neither legs nor feet. It was just the upper body, which was levitating, as its transition from my right to my left was smooth and slightly faster than a person walking, and the head did not seem to bob. My friend told me that he also saw the blue comb on the shelf at my left moving. That was what made the dull noise when the shadow passed between us. His brother woke up before him the day after and told him he saw a ghost in the kitchen. We didn't investigate more. Nothing else happened in the house ever since. I may not trust his brother, from which I don't have a detailed explanation, but I can't ignore what happened to me and my friend. We were two independent observers with two different positions, respectively, to what we saw as it passed right between us. All the lights in the house were on. We were far from the windows. The door was closed. So it's difficult for me to think of a shadow casted by something or of an illusion. Those don't seem proper explanations. I distinctly remember seeing the face of my friend through the passing shadow, so there was no power surge that dimmed the house lights. I have no proper explanations. My parents sold their house they've lived in for the past 20 years, and they were removing photo frames, artwork, etc. that were hanging on the walls. One of those frames contained a painting of an old house that my stepfather's auntie, stepfather's family, and family used to live in. My stepfather's auntie passed away from cancer many years ago. My stepbrother, who also had many fond memories of that house, also passed away a few years ago. And my stepfather's father also passed away many years ago. As you would imagine, the frame and painting was a bit dusty from hanging on the wall for 20 years. So my parents put the frame and painting on the kitchen table and were vacuuming the dust off the painting. I was standing next to them, observing the vacuuming process and admiring the painting. This is where it gets weird. Out of nowhere, I felt something gently tap on my forehead while my parents were vacuuming the painting. I was initially a bit freaked out by this. Then I realised that it was very likely that it could have been the spirit of either my stepfather's auntie, my stepfather's father, or my stepbrother who tapped on my forehead. I believed that my forehead being tapped on was a sign from above that they were watching, and appreciated that the painting of the old house was being cleaned and cared for. What is interesting is that I was the only one that felt a presence tap on my forehead. My mum and stepdad did not feel or experience anything like I did. I should also mention, those family members who passed away were aware of the existence of the painting while they were alive. A childhood friend of mine had a terrible start in life. He lived a block away. It wasn't the best area in the city. Somehow, my parents made it work and kept him away from trouble, but he didn't have the same consideration. When he went to school, his clothing was always a bit dirty, and he had such a bad attitude, none of the teachers wanted to deal with it. Instead, they just sent him out in the hallway or detention. Marcus, but everyone called him Mark, started to become avoided by everyone but myself and his little sister. We bonded over something stupid back in first grade, and no matter what happened, never strayed too far from each other. I knew about his home life, which was something most people weren't either aware of or didn't care to learn. His mother was a kind person when she stayed awake and not on whatever she was currently addicted to. His father wasn't home very often. When he did come home, there was hell to pay. Mark would take his sister over to my place whenever his father stayed around. My parents knew about everything that was going on and never questioned why Mark sneaked into our place past midnight, sometimes with his sister. At first, we tried to hide it, but soon we found out my parents wouldn't question it and just make breakfast for 3 kids. The problem with his father, mostly being, he got involved in a gang in some way. I found out when I got older that a concerned older woman called social services on his family. She turned up dead, and the case never went anywhere. Everyone was too scared of his father taking revenge if anyone dared to get his children taken away. He didn't love them, rather saw them as a way to get government assistance. If Mark's mother could have had more kids, she would be forced to do so. One afternoon, I got a phone call. My parents weren't home, so I answered it. Mark, on the other end, his parents fighting somewhere inside the house. "Can you come over and help?" he said in a low whisper, fearing he would get caught. Mark rarely ever outright asked for help with anything. Even at 11, I knew he was in trouble and needed to get over there right that moment. Him and his sister couldn't stay in a house like that any longer. "I'll be 2 minutes," I replied. I took my bike to get there faster. Ditching it in the tall grass between the 2 houses, I crept up to his bedroom window he normally sneaked out of. I couldn't hear the fighting any longer, and that wasn't a good sign. Before I could knock on the window, it opened and a bag was tossed out, nearly hitting me. Mark leaned out a bit surprised to see how fast I arrived. "We're leaving. I don't know what the hell we do, but we'll manage," he explained the bag. At the very least, I could talk him into staying at my place again. I wanted to suggest my aunt and uncle could take them both in without telling his parents, fully unaware that could be considered kidnapping. "Listen, Candy won't leave without a bunny. If she has a meltdown, it's all over, but she's always well behaved with you." That explained why he called me over. Reaching down, he helped me climb into his window. We listened for his father, knowing if we were caught, we both would be beaten. Candy, his little sister, a little over 5, already had a tear-stained face. She hurried over and hugged my arm, feeling safer with another person there. "Where is a bunny?" I asked. I could already tell if we forced her out of that house without it, she would freak. It wasn't often she had outbursts, but when they did happen, it lasted for hours. Her big eyes got wet, thinking about her missing bunny. Bun is with money," she told us in a small voice, already about to cry. That was bad. Their mother was always on the couch, and from what I heard over the phone, his father would be in the same room. Unless we got lucky and he left, we would need to leave without the bunny plush. If he hadn't left, we risked getting caught from Candy screaming. "Let's just check. Maybe we'll get lucky, I suggested. Mark wavered on the thought. No yelling came since I arrived, so maybe, just maybe, we could grab the bunny and leave without looking back. At least, we could peek into the room and make a run for it if his father was still home. He nodded as he got on Candy's level, telling her we needed to stay quiet. If we didn't, we might wake up their mother. She understood that and made a promise not to make a sound. With her in the middle and each of us holding a hand, we started down the dirty hallway towards the living room. We needed to go through the kitchen first, and my eyes watered from the rancid smell of the place. I knew Mark tried to keep the place clean, but it was too much for an 11-year-old to handle. Voices made us freeze. Mark caught my eye. In the moment we made the decision to press on to look inside the room to see who else might be inside the house. From where we peeked from, we could see Mark's mother passed out on the couch. I was shocked to see needles and other things those lame drug talks in school warned us about scattered on the coffee table in front of her. I knew she'd got into things like that, but being so young, it was really the first time I'd ever actually seen it. I always respected her for doing her best for Mark and Candy, and yet this addiction and being beaten down by her abusive husband made it impossible for those efforts to count. His father stood beside the couch, red-faced, trying to intimidate another man in the room. None of us knew who he could be. I didn't see it at first, but Candy's pink bunny plush sat on the floor in front of her mother, making it impossible to get without someone noticing. When the other man spoke, we all tensed up. "Are you telling me you don't have my product, or any money to replace it?" he asked in a voice, just about to break into a rage. "I told you, this bitch took it all. I left her alone with it for an hour, and look at this," Mark's father shouted back, gesturing at the ruined living room. The other man didn't appear impressed in the slightest. He looked disgusted, even being inside the room. He kicked at an empty, moulding drink can with a scowl on his face. "Now, how are you going to pay me this time?" he asked, arms crossed. "Take her. She can work it off. She's done it before, and it might teach her a lesson." My skin crawled at the words. Only after I got older did I know what Mark's father implied then. Candy let out a small cry hearing someone wanted to take her mother. Thankfully, neither of the men heard, and we held her to keep her silent. This was our chance to leave, but all three of us were too scared to move. "You know, I really doubt she took all of it. The amount I gave you would kill a few people, so where's the rest? I'll have her work off what she stole, but unless you cough up what she didn't take, I'll have you work it off as well." Mark's father stuttered, trying to argue, when something made him stop. His face grew pale as he stumbled back. A newcomer literally appeared behind the other man. Something so unnatural, it stunned him. A man who normally fought everyone as a first response. The woman died shortly after we arrived. I doubt she's worth anything unless you have clients I'm not aware of. The new figure spoke in a calm, clear voice. They were fairly tall and slim. A black hoof took a step forward, crushing trash underneath the terrifying and beautiful thin leg. It had a human male body, even though it clearly wasn't human in the slightest. He was dressed in a tucked-in white dress shirt, halfway open and with small frills along where the buttons should be. A long black mane of hair flowed halfway down his back. Long bangs obscured his face. Eyes hidden, but a long snout of pitch black smiled, showing off countless teeth. A long, thin tail, tipped of fur, lazily moved behind him. This creature looked far too elegant to be in a filthy room. The man wasn't startled by the creature's arrival, but instead angry over the fact Mark's mother passed away so quickly without anyone noticing. Mark and Candy just lost their mother, even though Candy was too young to really understand what was going on. I held her tight, eyes watering. Somehow, hearing that her mother sat dead on the couch felt harder to accept than a monster standing in the living room. "Just take care of him and search this house for any cash or my goddamn product," the other man shouted at the monster. He lit up a cigarette, and Mark's father started to back away, hands raised. His eyes never left the dark creature, taking measured steps towards him. "No, wait, my kids, you can..." His voice was cut off by the creature moving so fast none of us could see it. 1 second his father stood there, then the next he was being dragged behind the couch and out of sight. A horrible scream came that soon that turned into a garbling noise. Candy could no longer hold in her tears. She started crying, getting the smoking man's attention. His eyes widened when he finally saw us. He crushed the cigarette into the carpet. Mark snapped to attention first. He started to drag Candy down the hallway with me. We needed to get the hell out of there. When we all turned, we thought we could make it before the man caught up. Then, just as quickly as the monster appeared before, it stood in front of us. Long arms reaching towards the 3 screaming and frightened children. We struggled and thrashed trying to get free as he scooped us up to bring us into the living room. Instead of killing us, he placed us all in front of his employer. Candy is almost in a screaming fit, but too scared to go all out. I shook, unable to calm myself down, let alone another person. Mark, however, bravely stood between the man and his sister. It felt like ages ago, but I heard him promise his mother he would take care of his sister, no matter what. He never once went back on that promise, not at all caring what happened to himself. He would do anything to protect her. The issue being, he was just a child with no power whatsoever. At least this trip wasn't a waste. We can sell these 3 easily and make back what I would have gotten from that bastard. I should have just taken them a year ago with the mother. Christ, I missed out on a big payment letting her die. The older man was grumbling as he looked down at us as if we were a product instead of people. I couldn't believe what was happening. Monsters weren't real. These kind of things just didn't happen. The dark creature behind us, to keep us from escaping, proved that thought process wrong. I knew he just ate Mark's father, and yet I saw the man in front of us more frightening. This creature could just kill us. This man would do such horrible things our young minds didn't fully understand yet. Oh, selling children, are we? I didn't think you would sink so low, the creature commented with a slight laugh. His voice was light, and yet it almost sounded offended. I looked up at it, trying to see the hidden eyes, wondering if I read too much into the tone of voice. Don't insult me and do your job, the man shot back, his composure slipping. And what is my job? How about you remind little old me about our verbal contract we made years ago? I wasn't hearing things. The creature really hated the man in front of us. A flicker of hope came to my chest as I kept a grip on Candy's hand, wanting to run if what I suspected was true. You very well know what we agreed on. You worked for me in exchange for being able to eat anyone I tell you. You can't kill someone without a human's permission, right? He huffed, turning away. In his anger, the man realised what I already knew, far too late. His face pale and eyes wide in fear by the time he turned back around to see the monster whispering something in Mark's ear. My friend didn't say anything. He just nodded. It's an approval the creature needed. He moved fast, his hand on the other man's throat, lifting him off the ground. His former boss was unable to speak to save himself. We never did agree on a timeline, did we? So, I'm cancelling our contract. I believe I've gotten permission to do this the proper way, the creature spoke, easily able to hold up a full-grown man with one arm. I shielded Candy from the sight, but we all heard the sickening crack of the man's neck. His body tossed aside in the piles of trash near the door. All 3 of us shaking, and Candy wailing over everything that just happened. Mark moved first again. I found my body going in slow motion as I fought through the shock. When we were all picked up again, I couldn't even fight it. The creature had all 3 of us tucked under one arm. He walked into the kitchen and used his free arm to swipe all the trash on the table. He dumped us on the creaking surface. My body shook as I looked up at that terrible face. He just put us all on the table. What else was he going to do but eat us? Reaching down, he tore off the sleeve of his white shirt. Going over to the sink, he turned on the water until it ran warm to soak the torn fabric. We could have run then, but were all fascinated by the sight. With the sleeve soaked, he shut off the water to come back over. Mark protested when the monster took Candy's face in one hand. With the other hand, he started to clean off her tear-soaked dirty face. Humans are so distasteful, I swear. Letting children rot away in such a place, then trying to sell them for such disgraceful purposes. How has your race gotten this far? Now, there is a face under all that dirt. Come here, little one. Mark and I watched the exchange, mouths slightly open. Neither of us stopped the creature from picking up Candy in his arms to bounce her slightly, trying to calm her down, one would with a toddler. We'd seen him kill Mark's father. Well, sort of seen him do so. Our view was blocked, but we knew what happened. And yet, this creature was being so kind. It made our brains shut down. What are your names? The creature asked, still holding Candy. We introduced ourselves, minds swimming in confusion. He nodded as if our names were acceptable. Somehow, Candy calmed down as he let her grab a hold of his long wavy hair. His next question made us look at each other, wondering if this could all be a trick. How long do humans normally live for? He asked. 100, maybe, Mark offered. The creature paused, trying to calculate things we weren't aware of. He finally arrived at an answer, and from the long sigh, we didn't know if it was a good one at first. As he spoke, it was a bit strange seeing an animal-like mouth form proper words. I can last 100 years without eating. It'll be tough, but I suppose it can be done. Now, do you have anywhere to stay for at least 3 days? I'll need to arrange a human identity and... What are you talking about? Mark bucked in. I'm clearly talking about adopting you three. I'll need a human name as well. Eluis doesn't really fit in with your language, I suppose. I'm, not their brother, I corrected it, when I realised this creature wasn't aware of that fact. Oh, only 2 of you then, Eluis, the creature said, with a shake of his head. He really didn't care if it would be 2 or 3 kids. We were simply dumbfounded. Why would this creature want to take in the children of the man he just ate? I wanted to tell Mark to tell him to go to hell, and they could stay with me when the condition of the kitchen made me stop. After what they lived through, would staying with a monster be all that bad? Sensing our hesitation, Eluis spoke up. You may go to a different family member, or that foster care I've heard about, he offered. No, not that, Mark said suddenly. I knew the reason for his outburst. We both heard so many horror stories about the foster system in our city. Deep down, we knew there were good people out there. The issue being there had been 3 reports of separate foster families being arrested due to abuse in the past few years, and it tainted our young minds about the system. Not only that, Mark's father constantly blamed the foster family that raised him for being in the place he was in life, instead of his own shortcomings. Overall, being fostered sounded worse than prison, and it was the reason why Mark never sought our help for him and his sister. Without any other options, he gave in and took Eluis up on the offer. If we stay with you, can you show me how to be strong enough to protect my sister? Mark asked, while staring down the creature with hard eyes. We'll protect her together. However, I must get things sorted. If you're a friend and not part of this family, then please see if you can take these 2 in for a few days. I'll be back to get them. You promise? Candy spoke in a small voice that shocked us both. She also approved of her new, scary-looking guardian. Smiling with a mouth that did not do him any favours, Eluis nodded. I promise. Now scoot you 3 as I clean up this mess. Candy sat down and Mark took over holding her. She brought up the reason why I came over in the first place. Her bunny was still with their mother. My body felt cold as I thought about who needed to go and get in. Getting on her level, Eluis asked her if they could leave it with her mother and make her happy. After all, Candy was going over on a sleepover, and it helped her mother not miss them. His sweet talking got her to agree, and for the first time, Candy left the house without her plushie. I took them home, and all 3 of us were still dazed over what we went through. We expected my parents to come in asking what happened to Mark's and Candy's parents, but they didn't. The weekend passed by normally, aside from us not really feeling much like playing all that much. It worried my parents, but they didn't say anything. They wanted to give us time to be ready to talk about if something bothered us. That conversation never came. On the Monday after school, we were all in my room when a knock came on the door. We snuck down the hallway to peek over the stairs as we saw 2 police officers and a dark-haired man be invited in. My parents led them into the living room. We waited a few minutes until feeling ready to go down and interrupt the conversation. Mark and I already knew what they were going to say. Their mother passed away from an overdose, and his father, missing the bus, is suspected dead as well. Candy didn't really understand what was going on, and the tears started when she demanded to see her mother, and the adults were saying she couldn't. The dark-haired man swooped in to comfort her. He looked extremely handsome. He was as tall and slim as he was in his monstrous form. Candy calmed down enough after he spoke with her and let her hold his hand. You two might not remember me, but I'm your Uncle Elijah. We met once before. With your father missing, you'll be living with me, if that's all right. Without any doubt, this really man is the creature from before. Somehow, he changed things so legally, he was an uncle that didn't exist before. Whatever magic went into it, I wasn't able to ask about. For the past 3 days, I worried about my 2 friends being adopted by a stranger. After seeing a kind smile on Elijah's human face, my worries faded. He gave them time to pack and get ready to leave. My parents appeared relieved that the 2 children they couldn't help without risking our family's safety finally found a good home. A new worry started to form when I said goodbye, thinking it could be the final time I see those 2. The next few weeks were a blur. The funeral for their mother went by quietly, and I don't remember it that well. It took them a while to get the dust settled, but finally, Mark, Candy, and Elijah found a house to move into, which was only a 10-minute walk away. I didn't lose my best friend as I feared. When Mark came back to school, our teachers treated him better. His new guardian got him the help he needed for his behaviour issues at school so he could improve his grades. Mark went to one of the worst students to one of the best in the next few years. You would think having a monster for an adopted father would cause some issues. After watching him and Candy grow, I realised the real monster had been their biological father, the one who adopted them a bit aloof at times. Still, it was clear to everyone how much he loved his 2 human children. So much so, I feared he may eat them up one day. When it comes to monsters, there is always a risk. Knowing Elijah might not be able to hold himself back, Mark got hard-pressed on becoming a doctor to help others before his time ran out. With support from a real parent, I fully believe he's able to accomplish that goal.